You know, landing your dream job is supposed to feel like hitting the jackpot, like finally. All those late nights studying, all those networking events, all the self-doubt, finally paid off, for me, Olivia. That dream job was at Ethel Corp, a rising star in the sustainable tech industry. I'd always admired their innovative approach, their commitment to environmental solutions, and the visionary leadership of their CEO, Mr. Harrison. Getting hired as a senior project analyst felt like the universe finally aligning. I was ambitious. I was good at what I did, meticulous, organized, with a knack for spotting both opportunities and potential pitfalls in complex projects. I envisioned a future where I was contributing something meaningful, climbing the corporate ladder, and finally feeling truly valued. If you've ever walked into a new role with starry eyes, only to have them quickly dimmed by office politics and toxic personalities, then you might just get where I'm coming from. Because my dream job, it quickly turned into a subtle nightmare, thanks to a colleague named Brenda and a boss named Susan. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. So, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, because this is my story, the one where I learned that sometimes the biggest battles are fought in the boardroom. If you've ever had to deal with a workplace bully, or a boss who just wouldn't stand up for you, drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences. My first few weeks at Ethel Corp were everything I'd hoped for. The work was challenging, the team seemed dynamic, and the energy was infectious. I was quickly assigned to a high-profile project, the Green Wave Initiative, which aimed to integrate AI into renewable energy grid management. It was exactly the kind of innovative work I'd dreamt of. And then I met Brenda. Brenda wasn't new. She was a long-standing fixture in the department, a lead project manager who had been with Ethel for almost a decade. She had a loud, boisterous laugh, seemed to know everyone, and was constantly cracking jokes, often at someone else's expense. On the surface, she was the life of the office party. Beneath that veneer, however, was a sharp, calculating mind, constantly seeking to dominate, to control, and to diminish anyone she perceived as a threat. And apparently, I was a threat. It started subtly. I'd propose an idea in a team meeting, and she'd immediately dismiss it with a wave of her hand, then 5 minutes later, rephrase it as her own brilliant insight. Emails I sent to the team about project updates would be met with silence from her, only for her to then send out her own updates that were suspiciously similar to mine, but conveniently omitted my name. If I asked a question in a group chat, she'd reply to everyone but me, directing her answer to someone else as if I hadn't spoken. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to make me feel invisible, irrelevant, and utterly unsupported. My direct boss, Susan Thompson, was a quiet, almost timid woman in her late 40s. She managed our team, but her true expertise seemed to be in avoiding conflict at all costs. She was pleasant enough, always smiled, but when it came to any actual interpersonal friction, she would either completely disappear or, more often than not, side with the loudest, most dominant voice in the room, which was invariably Brenda's. Susan's desk was perpetually covered in half-finished forms, a clear sign of her aversion to anything that required decisive action. I tried talking to Susan early on. "Hey Susan," I said during a casual check-in. "I've noticed Brenda sometimes takes my ideas in meetings. It's a bit frustrating." Susan gave a weak smile. "Oh, Brenda. She's just enthusiastic, Olivia. She gets really passionate about projects. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it. You just need to speak up more. You know, make your voice heard." It was a classic deflection. Blame the victim. Minimize the problem. It sent a clear message Susan wasn't going to rock the boat for me, or for anyone. She valued peace, no matter the cost to fairness or morale. The emotional toll of this daily undermining began to mount. I was working harder than ever, trying to prove myself, not just to the company, but against Brenda's constant efforts to sabotage me. I started triple-checking every email, documenting every conversation, compiling meticulous records of my contributions. It felt exhausting, like I was fighting a silent war no one else saw. My only beacon of hope, the reason I didn't immediately pack my bags, was my mentor, Mr. Harrison, the CEO. Early in my tenure, During a company-wide new hire luncheon, I'd had the opportunity to briefly speak with him. I mentioned my background, my passion for sustainable tech, and my specific interest in the Greenwave initiative. He had been surprisingly engaged, offering a few words of wisdom, and even suggested we have a brief, informal chat once I settled in. It wasn't a formal mentorship, just a casual offer, but it felt monumental. He was a legend in the industry. Known for his integrity and his commitment to nurturing talent, I desperately wanted to impress him, to show him that his faith in Ethel Corp's mission was well placed. But reaching out to the CEO felt like a last resort. A nuclear option, I mean. You don't just call the CEO because your colleague is a bully, do you? Especially when your boss isn't backing you up. I felt like I needed to handle it myself, to prove I was capable, strong enough to navigate office politics. So, I kept quiet, trying to manage Brenda's insidious behavior on my own. Brenda, meanwhile, grew bolder. She'd start leaving me out of important email chains related to the Greenwave initiative. Despite me being a senior project analyst on it, she'd schedule meetings without me, then brief me afterwards, conveniently omitting crucial details that would make me look unprepared in front of others. She even started openly criticizing my work in team meetings, disguised as constructive feedback. "Olivia," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake concern, "your analysis on the Q3 projections was interesting. Perhaps a bit too conservative. We need more ambition, don't we, Susan?" She'd shoot Susan a conspiratorial glance, and Susan would nod weakly, avoiding my eyes. It was infuriating. I knew my analysis was sound. Based on rigorous data, Brenda's ambition was often reckless, and her numbers were usually inflated, designed to impress rather than to inform. But with Susan's tacit approval, Brenda's version of reality became the accepted truth. The psychological toll was immense. I started second-guessing myself, questioning my own judgment. Was I being too sensitive? Was I truly not good enough? The confident, ambitious Olivia who had walked into Ethel Corp just months ago was slowly being chipped away, replaced by a cautious, anxious version of myself. I'd spend my evenings reviewing my work, looking for flaws, trying to anticipate Brenda's next attack. My home life suffered. I was constantly stressed, distracted, unable to truly relax. I tried to address it directly with Brenda once, privately. "Brenda," I said, catching her by the water cooler, "I've noticed some discrepancies in how our project contributions are being communicated. I'd appreciate it if you could include me on all Greenwave email chains." She just laughed, a loud, jarring sound that drew the attention of nearby colleagues. "Oh, Olivia, darling, you're so literal. It's just a few emails. We're all a team here, aren't we? No need to get your knickers in a twist over a few little details." She patted my arm condescendingly, then walked away, leaving me fuming. It became clear she wasn't just inadvertently undermining me, she was deliberately doing it, enjoying the power dynamic, and Susan, my boss, was complicit in her inaction. It was a suffocating feeling, like being trapped in a glass box where everyone could see you, but no one could hear your screams. I began to feel isolated. Other colleagues seemed to sense the tension and mostly steered clear, not wanting to get involved. I understood their reluctance. Brenda was well connected, a perceived favorite of Susan's, and known for her vindictive streak. Standing up for me could put their own careers at risk. My initial excitement for the Greenwave Initiative project, the very reason I had joined Ethel, began to wane. It was hard to be passionate about something when every contribution was either stolen or dismissed. I started feeling resentful, angry, and utterly helpless. My confidence, which had always been my strongest asset, was eroding day by day. The thought of calling Mr. Harrison, my mentor, came to mind more frequently, a tiny voice in the back of my head. But each time, I dismissed it. What would I say? My colleague is mean to me. It sounded childish. And what if he thought I couldn't handle conflict? What if it made me look weak? I was still new. I needed to prove myself. I needed to be resilient, didn't I? This internal struggle was immense. My instinct, as a capable professional, was to solve the problem myself. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with data or logic. This was a problem of ego, of power dynamics, and of a fundamentally toxic environment enabled by weak leadership. I was stuck. The situation was building towards an inevitable climax. We had a major project review meeting coming up, the first major milestone presentation for the Greenwave initiative to senior leadership. I had poured hundreds of hours into the technical analysis, the feasibility studies, and the core strategic recommendations for the next phase. It was my baby, and I knew, with a sinking feeling, that Brenda was going to try and claim it, and Susan would let her. The week before the meeting was a blur of anxiety. I prepared my presentation, cross-referencing every single data point, anticipating every possible question. I knew my stuff. I was confident in my work, but I wasn't confident in the fairness of the environment. I meticulously documented every email, every shared file, every piece of evidence proving my intellectual property. It felt paranoid, but necessary. I had a final check-in with Susan. "Everything ready for the Greenwave presentation?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes, Susan," I confirmed. "My sections are all ready. I've compiled the latest data models." She nodded. Good. Brenda will be leading the overall presentation, of course. Just make sure your parts are concise. We don't want to bore the VPs with too much detail." It was another subtle dismissal, a reminder of my place, or rather, my lack of place, in her eyes. That meeting, I realized with a chilling certainty, wasn't just going to be a project review. It was going to be my public execution. Brenda would take the credit, Susan would allow it, and I would be left humiliated, my contributions erased. The thought filled me with dread, but also a simmering, righteous anger. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let them do this to me. The CEO, Mr. Harrison, would be at that meeting. He was known for being hands-on, for truly listening. He was my mentor, even if informally, my only card left to play. The idea of calling him, of exposing the rot in the department, still terrified me. But the alternative, silently accepting their abuse, terrified me more. I knew that if I let this slide, if I didn't fight back, I would lose more than just a project. I would lose my self-respect, my confidence, and my faith in my own abilities. And that was a price I was no longer willing to pay. The storm was coming, and I had to decide whether to weather it or unleash my own lightning. The days leading up to the Greenwave Initiative's milestone review meeting felt like walking through quicksand. Every step was heavy, every breath a conscious effort. Brenda's behavior, instead of softening as the big presentation approached, became even more overt, more brazen. It was as if she sensed my growing frustration and reveled in it, pushing my boundaries further, testing how much I could take. If you've ever been in a truly toxic work environment, you know it's not just the big dramatic confrontations that wear you down. It's the relentless, subtle chipping away at your confidence, the constant questioning of your worth, the feeling that you're always fighting an invisible battle. That's what Brenda excelled at. She'd start her day by loudly complaining within earshot about some people who don't pull their weight, or new hires who think they know everything. It was never direct, but the context was always clear. My desk was strategically placed near the common area, ensuring I couldn't escape her verbal jabs. I remembered one particularly galling instance involving a critical data report. I had spent days compiling it, cross-referencing sources, and ensuring its accuracy. It was a crucial component for the Greenwave Initiative's next phase. I emailed it to Susan and Brenda, clearly stating it was my work. The next morning, Brenda forwarded the report to the entire team, with a subject line that read, "Brenda's latest projections for Greenwave, revolutionary insights." And in the body of the email, she wrote, "Just finished polishing these numbers for the Greenwave team. Exciting stuff." She had barely changed a comma. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just stealing. It was a deliberate erasure of my contribution. I walked over to Susan's desk, holding my breath. "Susan," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Brenda just sent out my report, claiming it as hers. I spent all weekend on that." Susan looked up, her eyes wide, then quickly looked down at her keyboard. "Oh, that Brenda's she's very efficient. Olivia, she probably just tidied it up a bit. You know how busy she is. We're all collaborating here, right? No need to get possessive." Her voice was dismissive, almost scolding. "Just focus on your next task." That conversation was a turning point. It solidified, beyond any doubt, That Susan wasn't just passive, she was actively enabling Brenda. She wasn't just avoiding conflict, she was choosing sides. And she had chosen Brenda's side, the side of the established order, the side that maintained her own peace, no matter the cost to me. This wasn't just about Brenda. It was about Susan's failure as a leader, her betrayal of her team member, and her fundamental lack of integrity. The realization hit me hard. I had walked into Ethel Corp with so much hope, so much drive. I believed in their mission, in their values. But the daily reality was a stark contrast to the glossy brochures. It was a place where talent was stifled, where bullies thrived, and where weak leadership allowed toxicity to fester. My confidence, once a sturdy oak, felt like a sapling buffeted by an endless storm. I started having trouble sleeping. My mind would race, replaying every condescending remark, every stolen idea, every dismissive glance. I'd wake up with a knot in my stomach, dreading going into the office. The passion I once had for the Greenwave initiative began to curdle into resentment. It was hard to care about the project when every single contribution was met with either silent sabotage or overt theft. Am I crazy, I might ask myself? Am I overreacting? Is this just how corporate America works? I started pulling away from colleagues, wary of trusting anyone. The isolation was palpable, but beneath the despair, a cold anger began to simmer. I wasn't just going to accept this. I wasn't going to let them break me. I had worked too hard to get here, overcome too many obstacles. My previous job, a fast-paced but supportive environment, had shown me what good leadership looked like. This was clearly not it. I started documenting everything, meticulously, not just in my head, but in a separate, encrypted file on my personal laptop. Dates, times, specific instances of Brenda's undermining tactics. Brenda publicly dismissed my market analysis on date in morning stand-up, then presented suspiciously similar findings to Susan in a private meeting on date plus 2 days. Excluded from critical Greenwave planning email chain on date. Despite being senior analyst, Susan explicitly told me to just focus on my next task when I reported Brenda's theft of my Q3 report. I collected screenshot evidence of emails where I was excluded, or where Brenda took credit. It felt like I was building a legal case, preparing for a war I desperately hoped to avoid, but increasingly knew was inevitable. The thought of contacting Mr. Harrison, the CEO, became less of a desperate measure and more of a strategic imperative. He was my informal mentor. Yes, but he was also the CEO. The buck stopped with him. He had cultivated an image of integrity and a commitment to employee well-being, if that image was true. He needed to know what was happening in his company. If it wasn't, then I needed to know that too, so I could make my escape. But how do you reach out to a CEO with a problem like this? It felt so unprofessional, so dramatic. I kept rehearsing the conversation in my head. Mr. Harrison, my colleague is a bully and my boss is enabling her. It sounded trivial, like a schoolyard spat. I hesitated, wondering if I should try HR first. I did. Briefly, consider HR. But my previous experiences with HR departments in other companies had taught me that they often prioritize protecting the company over protecting the employee. And if Susan was protecting Brenda, and Brenda was well connected, HR might just sweep it under the rug, making my situation even worse. I decided against it. My gut told me to go straight to the top. My connection with Mr. Harrison, however tenuous, was my strongest asset. The weight of the impending milestone review meeting for the Greenwave initiative pressed down on me. I had poured my heart and soul into that project. It was my chance to shine, to demonstrate my value, to prove I was worthy of the trust Ethel Corp had supposedly placed in me. But I knew, with a sinking certainty, that Brenda would try to steal the spotlight, and Susan would let her. I spent the weekend before the meeting in a feverish state of preparation. I refined my sections of the presentation, adding more data, more robust projections, anticipating every possible question. I made sure my slides were clear, concise, and undeniable. I practiced my delivery, forcing myself to maintain a calm, confident demeanor, even as my stomach churned with anxiety. I knew Mr. Harrison would be at this meeting. He was particularly invested in the Green Wave initiative, seeing it as a flagship project for the company's future. This was my one chance to make him see not just my work, but the truth of what was happening. As Monday morning dawned, I felt a strange mix of dread and fierce determination. This was it, the day of reckoning. I dressed meticulously, choosing an outfit that projected competence and confidence. My hands were clammy, but my mind was clear. I had my presentation, I had my evidence, and I had the phone number of the CEO. A last resort that was looking more and more like my only option. Walking into the conference room, the air was already thick with corporate formality. Senior VPs, department heads, and project leads were already gathered, and there they were, Susan, looking nervous but composed, and Brenda, beaming, radiating an aura of self-importance. Brenda gave me a curt, dismissive nod, a silent message that I was irrelevant. I took my seat, my heart pounding. I could feel Brenda's eyes on me, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought I was defeated. She thought she was about to take all the credit, right in front of the CEO. And then Mr. Harrison walked in. The room immediately quieted. He was an imposing figure, not just in stature, but in presence. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the room, making brief eye contact with everyone. When his gaze met mine, there was a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a fleeting moment of connection that bolstered my courage. The meeting began. Susan kicked it off with a generic introduction, then immediately handed the floor to Brenda. As expected, Brenda launched into her presentation, taking full credit for the entire Green Wave initiative's progress. She presented my data, my analysis, my strategic recommendations as if they were her own. She spoke with confidence, with a practiced ease that made it seem utterly believable. My hands clenched under the table. My blood began to boil. This was it, the public execution. I felt a surge of indignation so powerful it almost made me stand up and scream. She was blatantly lying, stealing my work, right in front of everyone. And then, the moment that truly broke me, Brenda, finishing a segment of the presentation, turned to Susan. And as you can see, Susan, my team and I have worked tirelessly to ensure these numbers are solid. Perhaps if some other team members were as dedicated, we could have even better results. She shot me a quick, cutting glance, a thinly veiled dig at my perceived lack of effort, all while presenting my work. Susan, instead of defending me, instead of correcting the record, simply nodded. Yes, Brenda, absolutely. Your dedication to this project has been exemplary. We're very pleased with your leadership. She then turned to the VPs, beaming. In that instant, my world tilted. It wasn't just that Susan sided with Brenda. She actively, publicly, validated Brenda's smear against me. She chose to throw me under the bus, to sacrifice my reputation, my dignity, for the sake of her own peace and Brenda's approval. The betrayal was complete. The faint hope I had clung to, that perhaps Susan was just weak, not malicious, evaporated. She was malicious in her inaction, in her complicity. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. The anger, the humiliation, the profound sense of injustice coalesced into a singular, unwavering determination. I looked at Brenda, at her smug, victorious smile. I looked at Susan, her face blandly approving. And then, I looked at Mr. Harrison, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, his expression unreadable. This wasn't just about a project anymore. This was about principle. This was about standing up for myself, for my work, for my integrity. They thought they had cornered me, isolated me, rendered me powerless. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where my phone, with Mr. Harrison's number, lay silent but potent. The time for quiet suffering was over. The time for a reckoning had arrived. The fluorescent lights of the conference room seemed to hum, amplifying the suffocating silence that fell after Susan's damning validation of Brenda. My mind, usually a whirlwind of anxious thoughts, went eerily still. All the humiliation, all the frustration, all the insidious doubts they had planted over the past months coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. I was being actively, deliberately sabotaged, and my boss was a willing accomplice. If you've ever felt like you were in a boxing match with your hands tied behind your back, and then your own corner threw in the towel, you know this feeling. Brenda continued to present, her voice a confident drone, effortlessly spinning my hard work into her triumphs. Susan interjected occasionally, adding a commendation here, a supportive nod there, all directed at Brenda. It was a perfectly choreographed performance of erasure, designed to make me disappear. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear that had kept me silent, the hesitation about going over Susan's head, evaporated. What did I have to lose? My job, it felt worthless if it meant sacrificing my integrity every single day. My reputation, they were already actively destroying it. My self-respect, that was the one thing I refused to let them take. I felt a cold, clear anger settle in my gut. This wasn't just unfair, it was fundamentally wrong. Ethel Corp prided itself on innovation, on integrity, on a supportive work environment. Brenda and Susan were a cancerous growth, and they were actively poisoning the very values Mr. Harrison championed. I looked at Brenda, at her smug, victorious smile. She thought she had won. She thought I was broken. She thought I was just another stepping stone for her ascent. I looked at Susan, her face blandly approving, complicit in the theft and the humiliation. She thought she was keeping the peace, protecting her turf. They both underestimated me, profoundly. They mistook my compliance for weakness, my patience for passivity. And then, I looked at Mr. Harrison. He sat at the head of the table, a silent, observant presence. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to miss nothing. He had a reputation for being hands-on, for valuing merit, for truly listening to his employees, especially those involved in flagship projects like the Green Wave Initiative. This was my only shot. My hand instinctively went into my pocket, my fingers closing around my phone. Mr. Harrison's direct line, saved there from our initial mentor-mentee chat, felt like a live wire, pulsing with potential. The time for quiet suffering was over. The time for a reckoning had arrived. The meeting continued, a relentless assault on my contributions. Brenda was now discussing the detailed implementation plan, a section I had meticulously drafted. She paused, sweeping her gaze across the room, as if daring anyone to challenge her. And so, Brenda announced, her voice resonating with false modesty, we believe these next steps for Greenwave will position Ethel Corp as the undisputed leader in AI-driven energy solutions. We've optimized the deployment schedule and mitigated all identified risks. She beamed, awaiting applause. Susan nodded emphatically. Brenda's leadership here has been truly exceptional. Her foresight in planning these implementation phases has been invaluable. That was it. The final, unequivocal public validation of Brenda's theft and Susan's complicity. My head was pounding, but my vision was clear. I reached for my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I found Mr. Harrison's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to reconsider, to avoid the inevitable explosion. But then I pictured myself, weeks, months from now, swallowed whole by this toxic environment. My spirit crushed, my passion extinguished. No, not again, not ever again. I pressed call. The phone, set to vibrate, buzzed quietly in my pocket. But then, an unmistakable sound, a series of low, rhythmic vibrations, emanated from the head of the table, Mr. Harrison's phone, sitting silently on the polished wood surface in front of him, began to buzz. Every eye in the room snapped to him. Mr. Harrison, who never took calls during meetings, let alone a high-stakes executive review. His hand went to his pocket, then to the phone on the table. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression changed, from unreadable to a flicker of surprise, then a sharp, focused intensity. He looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the table. In that instant, a silent conversation passed between us. He knew it was me, and I knew he knew. He picked up the phone. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel that commanded immediate attention. He stood up and walked to the far end of the room, turning his back slightly to the table. The room fell into an awkward, tense silence. Brenda's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered annoyance. Susan's face was pale, a deer caught in the headlights. The VPs exchanged confused glances. This was highly unusual. I could hear snippets of Mr. Harrison's end of the conversation, though muffled. "Olivia, yes, I'm in a meeting. Is everything all right? Just a moment." He then turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over everyone, lingering for a moment on Brenda, then on Susan. A silent, powerful indictment. "This seems to be an urgent matter," he stated, his voice now devoid of any warmth. "Brenda, if you could pause your presentation for a moment, I need to speak with Olivia. Immediately, privately." Brenda gaped, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "But Mr. Harrison, I'm almost done," I said. "Immediately," he interjected, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And privately, Olivia, my office, now." The room collectively held its breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. But it was no longer from fear. It was from a surge of raw, exhilarating power. I stood up, gathered my laptop and notes, and walked out of the conference room. Following Mr. Harrison, I felt the collective gaze of Brenda, Susan, and every other executive burning into my back. This was it. The die was cast. Walking down the silent, luxurious hallway to Mr. Harrison's corner office. My mind raced. What would I say? How much detail should I provide? The meticulous documentation I had compiled suddenly felt like my most valuable asset. Mr. Harrison's office was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He walked straight to his desk, gesturing for me to sit in one of the plush chairs opposite him. His expression was serious, his eyes piercing. "Olivia," he began, his voice calm but firm. "You just called me directly, in the middle of a major executive review. You know I don't take calls during meetings. This implies something is deeply, gravely wrong. Tell me, what is going on?" I took a deep breath, marshaling my thoughts. This wasn't about emotion, it was about facts. "Mr. Harrison," I started, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I apologize for the interruption, but I felt I had no other recourse. I believe there is a severe issue of professional misconduct and a toxic work environment within the Green Wave Initiative team, specifically involving Brenda Hayes and Susan Thompson." His eyes narrowed. "Misconduct, explain." "Since joining Ethel Corp, I have been subjected to consistent undermining, credit theft, and public humiliation by Brenda Hayes," I stated, then moved directly into specific examples. "She has repeatedly taken credit for my work, including project analyses, data reports, and strategic recommendations, presenting them as her own. She has deliberately excluded me from critical email communications and meetings related to the Green Wave Initiative. Despite my role as senior project analyst, I pulled out my laptop, opening the encrypted file with my documentation. I have meticulously documented these instances. Mr. Harrison, here are timestamps, email screenshots, and internal memos demonstrating that the work Brenda presented as hers in that meeting was, in fact, my original contribution." I showed him the side-by-side comparisons of my original drafts and Brenda's slightly altered versions. His gaze scanned the evidence, his jaw tightening with each piece of damning proof. "And Susan Thompson," he asked, his voice now dangerously low. "Susan Thompson has not only failed to intervene or protect me, but she has actively enabled Brenda's behavior," I explained. My voice filled with a quiet anger. When I approached her with concerns about Brenda taking my ideas, she dismissed them, telling me to speak up more. And just now, in that meeting, when Brenda publicly made a derogatory comment about my dedication while presenting my work, Susan explicitly praised Brenda's exemplary leadership and foresight, implicitly validating Brenda's false claims and my humiliation. I looked him directly in the eye. "Mr. Harrison, I joined Ethel Corp because I believed in its values. I believed in your leadership. I am dedicated to the Green Wave Initiative and to this company's mission. But I cannot continue to work in an environment where my contributions are stolen, where I am publicly humiliated, and where my direct superior actively condones such behavior. This is not just detrimental to my professional growth. It's actively undermining the integrity and efficiency of a critical project. He leaned back in his chair, a grave expression on his face. He spent a long moment studying the documents, then looked at me, his gaze thoughtful. "Olivia," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is precisely the kind of behavior that undermines everything we stand for at Ethel. I assure you, this will be investigated thoroughly and immediately, and I promise you, you will be protected." The relief that washed over me was immense, a wave of profound gratitude. He believed me, he saw it. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," he said, a determined glint in his eye. "We have work to do. Go back to your desk for now. I will handle this. And Olivia, your work on the Green Wave Initiative has not gone unnoticed by me. I've been quietly observing your contributions since your hiring. They are excellent. This project needs your expertise and your integrity." His words were a powerful balm to my wounded confidence. It wasn't just vindication, it was validation. He had seen my worth all along, even when I felt invisible. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strength I hadn't felt in months. The burden of carrying this secret, of fighting this battle alone, had been lifted. The meeting was still ongoing. The silence in the conference room replaced by a low murmur of confused conversation. I knew the storm was coming for Brenda and Susan, and this time, I wasn't in the eye of it. I had unleashed the thunder. The reckoning was about to begin. Stepping back into that conference room after my private conversation with Mr. Harrison felt like walking into a completely different dimension. The air, which had been thick with tension and Brenda's condescending drone just moments ago, was now hushed, charged with a palpable sense of unease. Brenda was mid-sentence, her voice trailing off as I entered. Susan looked up, her eyes wide, a flicker of panic in them. Every executive at the table seemed to be holding their breath, their gazes fixed on me, then darting to Mr. Harrison's empty chair. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, didn't immediately return to the meeting. That was the first subtle sign of the impending storm. The executives, sensing the unprecedented nature of his sudden departure with me, cleared their throats, fidgeted with their pens, and exchanged nervous glances. Brenda tried to resume her presentation, but her usual confident swagger had evaporated. Her voice was thin, her gestures uncertain. She knew, even if she couldn't articulate why, that something fundamental had shifted. I sat back down in my chair, projecting an outward calm that belied the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My laptop was still open, the evidence against Brenda and Susan staring back at me from the screen. But I no longer felt the need to brandish it. Mr. Harrison had seen it. That was enough. The meeting limped along for another 10 minutes. Brenda stumbled through her remaining slides, her focus clearly shattered. Susan offered a few weak comments, her gaze flickering nervously to the door, as if expecting Mr. Harrison to burst back in. The VPs, usually quick with probing questions, were unusually silent, their attention fixed on the unspoken drama unfolding. Then, Mr. Harrison returned. He walked in, not with his usual brisk efficiency, but with a deliberate, almost solemn pace. His face was unreadable, his eyes betraying nothing. He took his seat at the head of the table, and the room fell silent. You could feel the collective tension, the anticipation of what he would say. "Brenda," he said, his voice quiet but incredibly firm, "thank you for your presentation. We will, however, be tabling the rest of the Green Wave Initiative review for now. There are some internal matters that require immediate attention." Brenda's mouth opened, as if to protest, but one look from Mr. Harrison silenced her. His gaze then swept across the table, lingering on Susan. "Susan," he continued, his voice cold, "I need to speak with you and Brenda in my office. Immediately following this meeting, the rest of you are dismissed." The room erupted in a flurry of activity as executives quickly gathered their belongings, eager to escape the palpable tension. Brenda and Susan, however, remained rooted to their seats, their faces pale. Brenda's triumphant smirk had been replaced by a look of utter bewilderment and fear. Susan looked like she was about to be sick. As the room emptied, I slowly packed my own things, I could feel Brenda and Susan's eyes on me, burning with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They knew. They didn't know how, or what exactly I had said, but they knew I was the catalyst. I walked out of the conference room without a backward glance, leaving Brenda and Susan to face their reckoning. The silence in the hallway felt different now. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of my isolation. It was the calm before the storm for them. The next few hours were a blur of nervous energy. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. My phone buzzed with texts from colleagues who had been in the meeting. What happened with Harrison and Brenda, Susan? Are you okay, Olivia? That was intense, I replied vaguely, saying only that Mr. Harrison was addressing some internal issues. I didn't want to gloat, or to spread rumors. The truth would emerge soon enough. The corporate grapevine, however, is a swift and unforgiving beast. Whispers began to circulate. Someone had seen Brenda and Susan being escorted into Mr. Harrison's office. Someone else had seen Brenda emerge, looking utterly distraught, before disappearing into HR. Then, Susan was seen leaving the building, her face white as a sheet, carrying a box of personal items. The rumor mill churned furiously, connecting the dots: my sudden, private meeting with the CEO, the abrupt dismissal of the review, and now, the obvious distress of Brenda and Susan. Around lunchtime, an official email landed in everyone's inbox. It was from HR, brief and to the point. Subject: important organizational update. Greenwave Initiative Leadership. Dear team, please be advised of an immediate organizational change within the Greenwave Initiative leadership. Brenda Hayes' employment with Ethel Corp has been terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, Susan Thompson has been reassigned to a temporary, non-leadership role within the Corporate Operations Department, pending a full review of departmental management practices. Further details regarding the ongoing leadership of the Greenwave Initiative will be announced shortly. We thank you for your understanding as we ensure a productive and respectful work environment for all employees. Sincerely, Ethel Corp HR. My breath caught in my throat, terminated, reassigned. It was more decisive, more immediate than I had dared to hope. Brenda was gone. Susan was stripped of her power. The justice was swift, silent, and absolute. They hadn't just lost their positions. They had been publicly, definitively, dismantled. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so intense it almost made me dizzy. It wasn't just vindication, it was a deep, quiet triumph. The constant anxiety, the gnawing self-doubt, the daily dread of walking into the office, it all began to lift. The toxic presence that had been poisoning my professional life was gone. My phone started buzzing again, this time with messages of congratulations and support from colleagues who had previously kept their distance. Wow, Olivia, what did you do? Good for you. Brenda was a nightmare. So glad to see this company actually has a backbone. It was an outpouring of suppressed frustration, a collective sigh of relief from an office that had clearly suffered under Brenda's bullying and Susan's weak leadership for far too long. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I hadn't explicitly said anything to them, but my actions had spoken volumes. My decision to go directly to the top, to trust my gut and my mentor, had paid off in spades. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison. Olivia, he said, his voice calm. I trust you received the HR announcement. Yes, Mr. Harrison, I replied, my voice still trembling slightly with residual adrenaline. Thank you for everything. I can't believe how quickly you acted. Brenda's pattern of behavior was not entirely new to us, though its extent, and Susan's enabling, was far more egregious than we had realized. He explained, your meticulous documentation, Olivia, was invaluable. It provided undeniable evidence that allowed us to act swiftly and decisively. We had received scattered, less detailed complaints before, but nothing as comprehensive or compelling as what you presented. And your courage in coming directly to me, especially during such a critical meeting, underscored the severity of the situation. He paused. Ethel Corp has a zero-tolerance policy for workplace bullying and ineffective leadership. My apologies that you had to experience such an environment, particularly on such an important project as the Greenwave Initiative. We failed to protect you, and that is unacceptable. His sincerity was profound. It wasn't a platitude. It was a genuine acknowledgement of the harm I had endured. "What happens now with the Green Wave Initiative?" I asked, my professional curiosity kicking in despite the emotional roller coaster. "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss with you," he said. "Given your deep involvement, your expertise, and frankly, your integrity and courage, I would like you to step up, effective immediately. You will be taking over as the lead project manager for the Green Wave Initiative. You will report directly to me for the next few months, and we will find a new, capable department head to replace Susan, who shares our values of integrity and collaboration. Are you up for the challenge?" Olivia, my heart soared, lead project manager, reporting directly to the CEO. It was a monumental leap, a direct validation of my abilities and a resounding triumph over the toxicity I had endured. It was the dream role, presented to me not just for my skills, but for my courage. "Yes, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice strong and clear, infused with renewed purpose. "I am absolutely up for the challenge. Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, Olivia," he replied, a rare warmth in his voice. "We'll meet first thing tomorrow to map out the next steps. And please, call me Robert." Robert, the CEO, my mentor, the man who had, with a single phone call, dismantled a toxic power structure and elevated me from targeted victim to empowered leader. Walking home that evening, the city lights sparkled brighter. The weight I had carried for months, the fear, the anxiety, the self-doubt, had vanished. In its place was a surge of confidence, a profound sense of self-worth. I had faced my bully, been betrayed by my boss, and found the courage to speak truth to power. And in doing so, I had not only saved my career, but I had reclaimed my professional identity. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about defining my boundaries, standing up for myself, and realizing that true leadership isn't about avoiding conflict, but about confronting injustice. I had learned that sometimes the biggest battles are fought not with fists, but with quiet courage, meticulous documentation, and a willingness to call the very top. My journey at Ethel Corp had begun as a dream, turned into a nightmare, and now was finally transforming into the triumph it was always meant to be. My career, once threatened by a bully and a weak boss, was now soaring, stronger and more resilient than ever. The days and weeks that followed my conversation with Robert Harrison were a whirlwind, a blur of professional vindication and a profound personal transformation. The initial shockwaves from Brenda's termination and Susan's demotion rippled through Ethel Corp, and the effects were immediate and far-reaching. If you've ever witnessed a corrupt system finally get dismantled, you know the palpable shift in atmosphere, the collective sigh of relief that sweeps through an organization. Brenda, the office bully, was gone, just like that. One day, a toxic presence. The next, a ghost. Her office was cleared out by facilities management, her name removed from all team rosters and project documents. The silence she left behind was louder than any of her boisterous laughs or cutting remarks. Colleagues who had once tiptoed around her now spoke openly, sharing stories of her petty tyrannies and Susan's enabling. It became clear that my experience was not an isolated incident. Brenda had a long history of undermining others, a pattern that had gone unchecked for far too long. Susan, on the other hand, wasn't entirely out. Her reassignment to a temporary, non-leadership role within the corporate operations department was a public humiliation. Her former reports, including me now, worked under interim leadership directly reporting to Robert. I saw her occasionally in the hallways, her face drawn, her usually perfectly coiffed hair a little disheveled. She avoided eye contact, shuffling past with a defeated air the power she had once wielded. The quiet authority she had used to enable Brenda was gone. She was simply a cog in the machine, stripped of her influence. My own world, however, was exploding with new opportunities. Robert Harrison wasted no time. The morning after the executive review meeting, I was in his office, not as a desperate employee seeking help, but as the new lead project manager for the Green Wave Initiative. We spent hours strategizing, mapping out the revised project plan, and discussing the necessary steps to get the team back on track. Robert's confidence in me was unwavering, and it was the fuel I needed. "Olivia," he told me, leaning back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Your insights into the project's technical aspects are invaluable, but what I truly value is your integrity. You stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and risky. That's the kind of leadership we need here at Ethel. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a profound vote of confidence. Robert didn't just give me the title, he gave me genuine autonomy. He truly wanted my input, my perspective. He listened. This was a stark contrast to Susan, who had just wanted me to be compliant. My first task as the new lead project manager was to rebuild team morale and re-establish clear project ownership. The Greenwave Initiative team had been silently suffering under Brenda's abrasive style and Susan's lack of direction. I held a candid team meeting, acknowledging the recent changes without dwelling on the specifics, and focusing squarely on the future. I know the past few months have been challenging, I began, looking at the faces around the table, many of whom had avoided my gaze just weeks prior. But we have a critical mission to successfully launch the Greenwave Initiative. My priority is to foster a collaborative, transparent, and respectful environment where every single one of your contributions is valued and recognized. We are a team, and we will succeed together. I implemented new communication protocols, ensuring everyone was included on relevant email chains and meeting invites. I championed individual contributions in public forums, giving credit where credit was due. I listened to their concerns, addressed their roadblocks, and empowered them to take ownership of their work. Slowly, cautiously at first, the team began to open up, their energy and enthusiasm returning. The productivity soared. The air in the department became lighter, more collaborative. It was amazing what a healthy work environment could do. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. There were whispers, mostly from Brenda's remaining loyalists or those who resented my rapid ascent. Some openly questioned how a relatively new hire could so quickly become lead project manager. The corporate grapevine, as I'd learned, could be both a tool for justice and a source of insidious gossip. But Robert's unwavering support, combined with my rapidly demonstrable results, quickly silenced most of the naysayers. My work spoke for itself. My relationship with Robert Harrison deepened beyond just a professional one. He became a true mentor, investing time in my development, offering advice, and challenging me to think bigger. We had weekly check-ins where we'd discuss project milestones, but also leadership philosophy, career trajectory, and navigating the complexities of a large organization. He taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, strategic communication, and the importance of integrity, especially when facing adversity. Olivia, he said during one of our mentor sessions, the strongest leaders aren't always the loudest or the most aggressive. They're the ones who have the courage to stand up for their principles, to protect their team, and to build a culture of respect. You demonstrated that courage. And that's a rare and valuable commodity. His words healed some of the deep wounds Brenda and Susan had inflicted. They reminded me that my worth wasn't just in my technical skills, but in my character. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize red flags, and to advocate fiercely for myself and for others. The Greenwave Initiative itself, freed from Brenda's reckless ambition and Susan's indecisiveness, began to hit its stride. We streamlined processes, optimized resource allocation, and fine-tuned the AI models. The project, once threatened by internal toxicity, was now a shining example of efficient, collaborative work. We even managed to accelerate key milestones. Much to Robert's delight, the vindication I felt was immense. It wasn't about seeing Brenda and Susan suffer, though there was a certain satisfaction in that. It was about reclaiming my professional space, about proving that integrity and hard work could, and would, win in the end. It was about showing that a single individual, armed with courage and truth, could dismantle a powerful, toxic structure. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I was sleeping better. My anxiety levels plummeted, and my passion for sustainable tech burned brighter than ever. I rediscovered hobbies I had neglected, reconnected with friends I had pushed away during my period of stress. I learned to set clearer boundaries in all aspects of my life, recognizing that my energy and well-being were precious resources to be protected. The company itself seemed to undergo a subtle but significant shift. Robert initiated a company-wide review of management practices, emphasizing respectful communication, fair recognition, and swift action against workplace misconduct. It wasn't just lip service, it was a genuine effort to create a healthier, more ethical environment. My story, though not widely publicized in detail, became a quiet testament to the new era at Ethel Corp. People saw that integrity was valued, and that bad behavior would not be tolerated. One day, several months into my new role, I was walking past my old desk, the one near the common area where Brenda used to launch her daily verbal assaults. It was now occupied by a new hire, a young, eager analyst. I smiled at them, offered a friendly greeting, and walked on. There was no dread, no anxiety, no lingering fear, just a sense of quiet accomplishment. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted those halls. The lessons I carried forward were profound. Trust your gut. Always, the insidious nature of bullying and gaslighting can make you doubt your own perceptions. Learning to listen to that inner voice, to validate your own feelings, is crucial. Documentation is your superpower. In a corporate environment, especially when facing misconduct, meticulous records are invaluable. They turn subjective feelings into objective facts. True allies are invaluable. Robert Harrison's support was transformative, identifying and cultivating relationships with people of integrity, especially those in positions of influence, can be a game changer. Courage is a muscle. Standing up to a bully, going over your boss's head, it's terrifying. But each act of courage strengthens that muscle, making you more resilient and confident for the next challenge. Boundaries are non-negotiable, whether in personal or professional life. Clear boundaries protect your energy, your self-respect, and your peace of mind. My career at Ethel Corp soared. The Green Wave initiative launched successfully, exceeding all expectations, becoming a landmark project for the company. I continued to climb, taking on more responsibility, leading larger teams. My voice, once silenced and undermined, was now heard, respected, and valued. I often reflect on that pivotal meeting. The moment my boss sided with my bully, it felt like the end of my career, the ultimate betrayal. But it was, in fact, the beginning. It was the moment I realized my worth was not defined by their disrespect, but by my decision to fight for myself. It was the moment I stopped being a target and became an empowered force. And it was all thanks to one urgent phone call to the CEO, my mentor, who truly believed in integrity and courage. It was a hell of a story, and it was just the start of my empowered journey. The transformation at Ethel Corp, sparked by that pivotal meeting, was more than just a change in personnel. It was a cultural shift. With Brenda gone and Susan sidelined, the air in the department, once thick with tension and passive aggression, became noticeably lighter. It was like a window had been opened, letting in fresh air and sunlight. My colleagues, no longer under the shadow of a bully and an enabling boss, seemed to breathe easier. Their creativity, their willingness to collaborate, and their overall engagement soared. It was a powerful testament to how a single toxic individual, unchecked, can stifle an entire team. My new role as lead project manager for the Green Wave initiative was exhilarating. Reporting directly to Robert Harrison, the CEO, meant I had an unprecedented level of autonomy and support. Our weekly meetings weren't just about project updates. They were deep dives into strategy, innovation, and leadership development. Robert became more than a mentor. He was a champion, guiding me, challenging me, and implicitly teaching me the true meaning of ethical leadership. He empowered me to reshape the Green Wave team. I conducted one-on-one meetings with every team member, listening to their insights, their frustrations, and their ideas. I discovered a wealth of untapped talent and suppressed ambition. Many had felt undervalued, their contributions overshadowed by Brenda or ignored by Susan. I focused on building an environment of trust and transparency. I implemented regular, structured feedback sessions, ensuring everyone's voice was heard. I started championing individual contributions, publicly recognizing successes, and fostering a collaborative spirit where credit was shared fairly. The results were almost immediate. The Green Wave initiative, once plagued by internal friction and delays, began to move at an accelerated pace. We hit milestones ahead of schedule. The quality of our deliverables improved dramatically, and the team's morale skyrocketed. It was incredibly fulfilling to witness, to lead, and to be a part of. My expertise, once undermined, was now fully utilized, and my passion for sustainable tech burned brighter than ever. Of course, not every day was a fairy tale. There were still challenges, the inherent complexities of a large-scale tech project, unexpected technical roadblocks, and the occasional lingering skepticism from other departments who were accustomed to the old way of doing things. But now, I had the tools, the support, and the confidence to navigate them. And I wasn't alone. My team, unified and motivated, was a formidable force. The corporate landscape around me also subtly shifted. Robert initiated a comprehensive review of management practices across Ethel Corp, sending a clear message that the behaviors exhibited by Brenda and Susan would no longer be tolerated. HR procedures for reporting workplace misconduct were streamlined, and a new emphasis was placed on leadership training focused on empathy, accountability, and fostering positive team dynamics. My story, though never explicitly detailed in public company announcements, became a quiet cautionary tale for some, and a source of inspiration for many. It underscored Robert's commitment to transforming Ethel Corp into a truly ethical and empowering workplace. My personal life also saw a profound transformation. The constant stress and anxiety that had plagued me for months, stemming from the toxic work environment, dissipated. I started sleeping soundly again. My relationships with friends and family, the healthy ones, at least flourished. I rediscovered hobbies I had neglected, like hiking and painting, finding new avenues for creative expression and stress relief. I felt a sense of holistic well-being that had been absent for far too long. The contrast with my old life, especially with the insidious emotional toll Brenda and Susan had inflicted, was stark. I realized how deeply the constant undermining had affected me, making me doubt my own judgment, question my capabilities, and even dim my ambition. But by standing up for myself, by choosing to expose the truth, I had not only saved my career, but had also reclaimed my self-worth. I learned invaluable lessons throughout this journey, lessons that transcended the corporate world and applied to all aspects of life. Your integrity is non-negotiable. Compromising your values, allowing yourself to be diminished for the sake of peace or fitting in, ultimately costs you more than any job or relationship is worth. Speaking your truth, even when terrifying, is paramount to maintaining your self-respect. Trust your instincts, that knot in your stomach, that feeling of unease. It's often your inner voice trying to tell you something is wrong. Learning to listen to it and to act on it is a powerful form of self-preservation. Documentation is your armor in any conflict, particularly in professional settings. Facts and evidence are your strongest allies. Meticulous records turn subjective accusations into objective truths. The power of a true mentor. Robert Harrison wasn't just a boss. He was a leader who believed in nurturing talent and upholding ethical standards. Identifying and connecting with such individuals can be transformative, providing not just guidance, but also critical support when you need it most. Boundaries are essential for a healthy life. This entire experience reinforced the critical importance of setting and maintaining strong personal and professional boundaries. It taught me to articulate what I would and would not tolerate, and to walk away from environments or relationships that consistently violate those boundaries. My courage in confronting Brenda and Susan, and then in accepting a bigger role, solidified my ability to set non-negotiable limits. My career at Ethel Corp soared. The Greenwave initiative, under my leadership, became a benchmark for success within the company and a recognized innovation in the industry. I was promoted again, taking on a broader leadership role within the renewable energy division. My voice, once silenced and dismissed, was now sought after, respected, and influential. I became a mentor myself, striving to create the kind of supportive and empowering environment that Robert Harrison had provided for me. I made it my personal mission to ensure that no one else at Ethel Corp would have to endure the kind of toxic bullying and weak leadership that I had. Sometimes, I'd see a new employee, looking bright-eyed and eager, and I'd remember my own beginnings at Ethel. I'd offer a friendly smile, a word of encouragement, and make a mental note to check in with them, to ensure they felt supported and heard. The culture had changed, but vigilance was still important. The contrast between the person I was then and the person I am now is immense. I arrived at Ethel Corp, an ambitious but somewhat naive professional. Seeking external validation, I almost left, defeated and dejected, but by choosing to stand up for myself, by making that terrifying call to the CEO, I transformed from a victim into a survivor, and ultimately into a leader. The injustice I faced, the betrayal by my boss, and the relentless bullying became the crucible in which my true strength and resilience were forged. It was a hell of a story, a dramatic turning point that redefined not just my career, but my entire sense of self. I am stronger, more confident, and more authentically myself than ever before. If you're out there, silently enduring a toxic work environment, feeling overlooked, undermined, or bullied, please know this: your voice matters. Your worth is inherent. You don't have to suffer in silence. It takes immense courage, but standing up for yourself is the most empowering thing you can do. Find your allies, document everything, and remember, sometimes, the only way to clear the air is to stir the pot, even if it means calling the very top. Your future, your peace, is worth fighting for. Hit that like and subscribe button if my story resonated with you. Share your own experiences with workplace challenges and triumphs in the comments below. And please, share this video with anyone who might be struggling to find their voice and stand up for themselves. Your strength is waiting to be unleashed.